Have you ever felt the world around you collapse? Not the walls of brick or the roof overhead, but something inside, your beliefs, your hope, your sense of meaning, slipping away like sand through your fingers. What happens when the light you've relied on flickers out, leaving you stranded in a darkness without stars, without a moon? Do you dare face that void, or do you turn away, pretending it's not there? This isn't some fleeting nightmare. This is the dark night of the soul, a term ancient yet alive, a journey etched in the fiery verses of St. John of the Cross, penned in the depths of a prison cell centuries ago. But don't fool yourself into thinking this belongs only to mystics or the devout. It belongs to you, to me, to anyone who's ever stood at the edge of their own abyss and asked, "Who am I when there's nothing left to hold on to?" Picture this. You wake up one morning, and everything that once defined you, your job, your family, your dreams, feels like a stranger's shadow. Have you ever wondered why the things that used to make you happy now leave you hollow? Why your own laughter sounds like an echo from someone else? Science might label it an existential crisis. Psychology might dissect it as the collapse of the ego. But beneath it all, it's a whisper from the universe. You've walked far enough on this false path. Now it's time to return to the truth. Here's the question. Are you brave enough to listen? When everything you've built, your reputation, your relationships, your convictions, is stripped away layer by layer, what do? Do you scream for the old light to come back? Or do you step into the darkness to find a new flame? One you ignite yourself? The dark night of the soul isn't punishment. It's an invitation, raw, unrelenting, to confront the most piercing question of all. Who am I, really, when I have nothing left to prove? Think back to the darkest moment of your life. How did it feel? Lost, powerless, or just so exhausted you didn't want to go on? What pulled you up? Or better yet, what's still holding you back, keeping you too afraid to move forward? This isn't about sleepless nights or weary days. This is about being thrown into a forge where every outer shell you've worn is burned away, leaving only what cannot be destroyed, the real you. Centuries ago, mystics said this darkness was a gift from God, a sacred purging. Today, science tells us it's the brain rewiring itself after breaking apart. But whether you lean on the divine or reason, the question remains, can I find myself in loss, or will I stay lost in the ruins of my old self? This isn't a gentle query. Stabs at your core, demanding brutal honesty. So, are you ready? Ready to cross the threshold where everything familiar vanishes? Ready to hear the call from the darkness, not to destroy you, but to rebirth you? The dark night of the soul doesn't promise an easy escape. It doesn't coddle you with empty comfort. But it does promise this. If you walk through it, you won't be the same. You'll be stronger, truer, and maybe, for the first time, truly yourself. What if this isn't the end, but the beginning? What if the emptiness you feel isn't a void, but a canvas? One you've been handed to paint with the colors of your soul. The ancients walked this path, their footsteps echoing through time. Scientists now map it with data and logic. And every day, people like you live it, whether they name it or not. The dark night isn't a curse. It's a crucible. It's the universe daring you to shed what you're not so you can become what you are. The next step takes us back to the ancient roots, where lost souls once found light in the deepest night. But first, ask yourself this. Will I run from this darkness, or will I let it guide me home? Step back with me, beyond the hum of modern life, to a time when the world was lit only by fire and faith. Imagine a man hunched in a cold, damp cell, his hands trembling as he scratches words onto scraps of paper. Words that burn with longing, despair, and a strange, unshakable hope. This is St. John of the Cross, a 16th century Spanish mystic, and his poem, The Dark Night of the Soul, wasn't born in comfort. It was forged in captivity, a cry from a soul stripped bare, yearning to unite with something greater than itself. But his story isn't the beginning. It's a thread in a tapestry woven across centuries, across cultures, calling to us from the shadows of the past. What did he see in that darkness? Not just the stone walls of a Toledo prison, but a night so deep it swallowed every illusion he'd ever clung to. He wrote of a soul fleeing its house in secret, stepping into the unknown, guided only by an inner flame no one else could see. For him, this wasn't defeat, it was divine alchemy. The dark night was God's hand, peeling away pride, fear, and worldly attachments until nothing remained but the raw, trembling essence of the self, ready to merge with the eternal. Can you feel the weight of that? A man locked away, yet freer than most who walk unshackled, because he dared to let the darkness teach him. But this isn't a tale confined to one man or one faith. Look further back, and you'll hear the same call echoing through the ages. In ancient Greece, Persephone didn't just wander into the underworld. She was dragged there, forced to face the cold grip of Hades before emerging as a queen of both light and shadow. Her dark night wasn't a punishment. It was her becoming. Across the plains of India, Siddhartha Gautama sat beneath a Bodhi tree, staring down the demon Mara, lord of illusion, whose whispers of doubt and desire tested him to his core. He didn't run. He endured the night, and from it the Buddha was born. Even among indigenous tribes, shamans speak of the journey through the dark, a descent into the unseen world to retrieve lost pieces of the soul. Do you see the pattern? This isn't a fluke of history. It's a rhythm, a pulse beating through humanity's story. These ancients understood something we've half forgotten. The dark night of the soul is sacred. It's not chaos or collapse. It's a crucible. For St. John, it was God's pruning shears, cutting away the overgrowth of ego to reveal the vine of divine connection. For the Greeks, it was a myth of transformation, proving that even in the deepest pit, power waits to be claimed. For the Buddha, it was the final battle with delusion, a stripping down to the unshakable truth. Across these voices, the message rings clear. The darkness isn't here to break you. It's here to remake you. But here's the question. If they found light in their nights, why do we fear ours? Let's bring this closer. You don't need a prison cell or a mythic underworld to know this darkness. Today, we're captives of different chains, expectations, screens, the endless grind to prove we're enough. Have you ever felt that weight? That moment when the life you've built feels like a cage you didn't choose? The ancients didn't have our words, depression, burnout, identity crisis, but they knew the feeling. They knew what it was to stand in a void where every certainty crumbles, where the gods or the stars or the self seem silent. And yet they didn't despair. They listened. They waited. They let the night speak. What did it say? To St. John, it whispered of a love so vast it demanded surrender. To Persephone, it promised a crown born of struggle. To the shamans, it offered visions of wholeness. This wasn't random suffering. It was purpose cloaked in shadow. The dark night has always been a rite of passage, a threshold you don't stumble across but are called to cross. It's as old as humanity itself, etched into our bones, our myths, our prayers. And it's still calling right now to you. Think of it. When was the last time you felt truly lost? Not just confused or tired, but unmoored, as if the compass of your life had shattered? That's the echo of this ancient night, reaching through time to meet you. The mystics didn't sugarcoat it. It hurts. It's lonely. It's a fire that burns away everything you thought you were. But they also knew what we're only beginning to rediscover. On the other side lies something real, something unshakable. The Greeks called it wisdom. The Buddhists called it awakening. St. John called it union with the divine. Whatever name it bears, it's yours to claim, if you're willing to walk the path. So, here we stand, at the edge of history's long shadow. The dark night of the soul isn't a relic of the past. It's a living inheritance, a challenge as urgent now as it was then. The ancients faced it with courage, not because they were fearless, but because they trusted the process. Can you? The night is calling, not with threats, but with a promise. Step into me, and I will show you who you've always been. The next chapter turns to science, where the mind meets this mystery, but for now, listen. The past is speaking. What will you answer? Now let's shift the lens. We've walked with mystics through their shadowed nights, heard the whispers of ancient myths. But what happens when we turn the tools of science on this dark night of the soul? What does it look like under the microscope of reason? Not as a divine riddle, but as a storm raging in the circuits of your brain. Spoiler, it's not less wondrous. It's a dance of chaos and creation, a collision of biology and spirit, and you're the stage where it all unfolds. Picture your mind as a city, bustling streets of thought, towers of memory, bridges of belief connecting it all. Then comes the dark night, a tempest that tears through, toppling structures you thought were permanent. You feel lost, unmoored, maybe even broken. But here's where science steps in with a flashlight. This isn't just collapse. It's reconstruction. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist who plumbed the depths of the human psyche, called it meeting the shadow, the hidden, messy parts of yourself you've buried under layers of routine and pride. He didn't see it as failure. He saw it as the gateway to wholeness. Ever wonder why the moments you feel most shattered are also when you start to see yourself most clearly? Let's go deeper into the brain itself. Neuroscience tells us that when life hits you hard, your neural wiring doesn't just sit there. It rewires. There's a term for this: neuroplasticity. Think of it like a forest after a fire. Old branches burn away, and new paths emerge through the ash. Studies of people who've faced trauma, say losing a loved one or surviving a crisis, show something wild. Their brains don't stay stuck. After the initial chaos, areas tied to meaning-making, like the prefrontal cortex, light up in new ways. Researchers call it post-traumatic growth. Sound familiar? It's the dark night by another name. Not a breakdown, but a breakthrough, etched into your cells. Take a study from the University of California. People who'd been through deep depression often reported a strange shift afterward. A sharper sense of purpose, a quiet strength they didn't know they had. Science can measure the brain's electrical hum, track its chemical tides, but it can't fully explain the why. Why does suffering sometimes carve out space for wisdom? Why do you emerge from the storm not just alive, but more alive? This is where the lab coat meets the robe of the mystic. St. John of the Cross might have said it's God stripping you down. A neuroscientist might say it's your brain shedding outdated circuits. Both are right. Both see the same fire, just from different angles. But let's make this real. Remember a time you hit a wall? Maybe a job fell apart, a relationship crumbled, or you just woke up one day wondering, what's the point? Your mind felt like a war zone, right? Thoughts racing, emotions crashing, a fog so thick you couldn't see tomorrow. That's your brain in the storm, amygdala firing with fear, old habits short-circuiting. Yet, in that mess, something else kicks in. Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance. When what you thought was true clashes with what is. It's uncomfortable as hell, but it's also the spark. You start questioning, who am I without this job, this person, this version of me? And there it is, the dark night, rewiring you from the inside out. Here's the kicker. Science doesn't just describe this. It proves you're built for it. Your brain isn't a fragile machine that snaps under pressure. It's a living, adapting marvel. Ever heard of the default mode network? It's the part of your mind that hums when you're daydreaming or navel-gazing. Basically, your inner narrator. During a dark night, that network goes haywire, unraveling the stories you've told yourself about who you are. That's why you feel so lost. But as it quiets, something else grows. Awareness. You stop thinking about yourself and start seeing yourself. Jung would say you're integrating the shadow. A brain scan might show new synapses firing. Either way, you're not the same when it's over. So what's the bridge here? The ancients leaned on faith to explain this night. God, destiny, the cosmos sculpting the soul. Science swaps the poetry for data. Dopamine dips, serotonin shifts, neural pathways rerouting. But strip away the language and the core holds. This is a process with purpose. It's not random pain. It's evolution, biological and spiritual, happening in real time. Ever notice how the people who've been through the ringer often have a quiet glow about them? Not because they're unscathed, but because they've been forged. Science can map the how, the dark night whispers the why. Still, it's not all lab charts and brainwaves. You feel this in your bones before you understand it in your head. That exhaustion after a long cry, that clarity after a sleepless night. It's your mind and soul wrestling together, tearing down the old to build something new. The mystics called it purification. Psychologists call it resilience. You might just call it surviving. But whatever you name it, it's proof. You're not a victim of the storm. You're the storm itself, reshaping who you'll become. Next, we'll step into the mirror of the self, where the dark night forces you to face your truest reflection. But for now, consider this: what if science isn't debunking the mystics, but catching up to them? What if your brain's chaos is the echo of a cosmic call, one you're already answering, whether you know it or not? You're standing in the dark, holding a mirror. At first, you expect to see your face. Tired eyes, maybe a faint smile, but there's nothing. Just a void staring back, cold and silent. Then it hits you. The void isn't outside you. It's you, or at least, it's what's left when everything you've built around yourself crumbles. Welcome to the heart of the dark night of the soul. This isn't about losing a job or a lover or a dream. This is about losing you, the you thought you were, and finding something truer in the wreckage. The ego's a tricky beast. It's the voice that says, I'm my achievements, I'm my relationships, I'm the mask I wear for the world. It's the scaffolding you've spent years erecting, piece by shiny piece, until it feels like home. Then the dark night rolls in like a wrecking ball. That promotion you chased? Meaningless. The approval you craved? Gone. The beliefs you swore by? Dust. It's not gentle. It's a gut punch. A stripping away so raw you're left naked, shivering, wondering who's left when the costume's torn off. Ever felt that? That moment when the ground drops out and you're falling into yourself? St. John of the Cross saw this as divine surgery. He wrote of the soul fleeing its house, its comfortable, cluttered house of pride and illusion, into a night where God could cut away the excess. He didn't mince words. It hurts. It's supposed to. The ego doesn't go quietly. It clings, it screams, it begs you to rebuild the old walls. But here's the twist. That pain isn't destruction. It's deliverance. What if the thing you're losing isn't you at all, but a lie you've been living? What if the night's not stealing your light, but handing you a torch to see what's real? Let's ground this. Think of a time you failed, really failed. Maybe you poured your heart into something, and it fell apart. Or someone walked away, and you couldn't stop them. In that moment, what did you feel? Shame? Fear? A hollow ache where your confidence used to be? That's the ego cracking. Your story of I'm enough, or I'm in control, shattering against reality. Science backs this up. Psychologists call it an identity crisis, a clash between who you think you are and who life reveals you to be. But the dark night takes it further. It's not just a crisis, it's a reckoning. It asks, if you're not your successes, your titles, your loves, who are you? Here's where the mirror turns brutal. You look into it expecting answers, but all you get is questions. Why did I care so much about that? Why did I let it define me? The night doesn't flinch. It holds your gaze until you see the truth. The ego's a house of cards, fragile and fleeting. Jung, the mind's great explorer, said this is when you meet your shadow, not just your flaws, but the parts you've denied to fit the world's mold. It's ugly, messy, human, and it's yours. Can you stand to look? Can you bear to love it? This is the pivot. The dark night doesn't stop at tearing down. It demands you face what's left. No crutches, no distractions. Just you, raw and unfiltered. For St. John, this was the soul laid bare before God, ready for union. For you, it might be the moment you realize your worth isn't tied to what you do or who approves. It's in your bones, your breath, your being. Ever had that flicker? That quiet, unshakable knowing that comes after the tears dry? When you're too tired to pretend anymore. That's not weakness. That's power the ego could never give you. But it's not easy. The ego fights back, whispering, "You're nothing without me." It tempts you to rebuild, to chase the old highs, to plaster over the cracks. And sometimes you do. You run back to the familiar, even when it chokes you. I've been there, clinging to a dead-end job, a toxic friendship, anything to avoid the mirror. But the night's patient. It waits. It knows you'll return. Because the truth, once glimpsed, doesn't let go. Have you felt that pull? That nagging sense that the life you're living isn't yours? Here's the gift. When the ego falls, you don't. You stand shaky, maybe, but real. Science sees this too, those neural pathways we talked about. They're not just rewiring. They're stripping away the clutter, leaving a cleaner slate. The mystics called it purification. Psychologists call it integration. You might call it waking up. Suddenly, the mirror isn't empty. It reflects a you that's been there all along, beneath the noise. Not perfect, not polished, but alive. Fiercely, stubbornly alive. So what do you do with this? You don't rush to fill the void, not yet. You sit with it. You let the night teach you. Because this isn't the end of the story. It's the turning point. The ego's collapse isn't your collapse. It's your liberation. The dark night hands you a chisel. Carve yourself anew. Will you? Or will you cling to the rubble, afraid of what's possible when you're free? Next, we'll rise from this mirror into the light of meaning. How this night reshapes your life. But for now, look closer. The reflection's changing. That's not the void anymore. That's you, unmasked, unmade, and on the verge of becoming. You've walked through the fire. The dark night of the soul has stripped you bare. Your illusions torched, your ego reduced to ash. But here's the secret the night kept until now. Ash isn't the end. It's the beginning. From that smoldering pile, something stirs. Wings unfold. A spark ignites, and you rise, not as the person you were, but as a phoenix, reborn. This isn't just a pretty story. It's the truth of what happens when you survive the darkness. You don't just endure, you become. So what does this mean for your life right here, right now? Think of the phoenix, ancient Egypt's Bennu, a bird that burned itself to cinders every 500 years, only to emerge anew, stronger, radiant. That's you after the dark night. St. John of the Cross saw it as the soul's reunion with the divine, a holy resurrection. Science calls it resilience, the brain's knack for turning pain into growth. But let's make it real. It's the moment you look back at the wreckage of your old life and realize it wasn't holding you together. It was holding you back. Ever felt that shift? That quiet, fierce certainty that you're not broken, you're being built? This isn't theory, it's lived. Take someone like Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor who lost everything. Family, freedom, hope, yet found meaning in the camps by choosing to see purpose beyond suffering. Or consider a friend who hit rock bottom, divorce, addiction, despair, and came out the other side painting, teaching, living with a fire they never knew they had. These aren't exceptions. They're proof. The dark night doesn't just take. It gives. It hands you a blank page and says, write your life. Not the one you were handed, but the one you claim. What would you write? Here's where it gets practical. After the night, your world shifts. That job you chased for status? You might let it go, trading the corner office for a quiet studio where your soul breathes. Those friends who drained you? They fade, replaced by people who see the real you, not the mask. Suddenly, success isn't a paycheck or a likes count. It's a sunrise you actually stop to watch, a conversation that cuts deep, a peace you can't fake. Science backs this. Studies on resilience show that after trauma, people often redefine happiness. Less stuff, more substance. The ancients knew it too. The phoenix doesn't carry its old nest into the sky. But it's not all smooth flying. The dark night leaves scars, doubts that linger, wounds that ache when it rains. You might still wake up some mornings wondering if you're enough. That's okay. The difference is now you know you don't have to prove it. You are it. This is the divine gift St. John preached. A worth woven into your existence, not earned by your hustle. It's what psychologists call intrinsic value, what you might call freedom. Ever had that moment, after the tears, after the fight, where you just are, and it's enough? That's the phoenix stretching its wings. Let's talk about the child within. That piece of you the night uncovers. Remember how you used to dream without limits. How a puddle was an ocean, a stick a sword. The dark night digs that kid out from under years of shoulds and musts. Maybe you pick up a paintbrush again, or sit in silence instead of scrolling, or laugh without caring who's watching. It's not childish, it's alive. Studies show this reconnection heals, lowering stress, sparking creativity. The mystics would say it's your soul coming home. You might say it's you, finally you. So what's the meaning of it all? It's this: the dark night isn't a detour from life. It's the road to it. It's the universe's tough love, pruning what's dead so you can bloom. It's not about climbing ladders or collecting trophies. It's about standing in your own skin and saying, "This is mine." Look at the people who've walked this path. They don't glitter with perfection. They glow with presence. They've learned what matters: love, growth, connection. Not because it's easy, but because they've seen what doesn't. What matters to you now that the night's cleared the clutter? This isn't a one-time deal. Life's a cycle of nights and dawns. Each dark night, a chance to shed more, to rise higher. The ancients saw it in the stars, the seasons, the phoenix's endless flight. Science sees it in your brain's ability to adapt, again and again. And you live it every time you choose to keep going. That's the strength you gain, not a shield against pain, but a fire within it. Ever met someone who's been through hell and still smiles? That's not denial, that's victory. So, here's your charge. Don't fear the next night. It's coming, maybe not today, but someday. When it does, remember this: it's not here to bury you. It's here to unearth you. Be patient with the ashes. Be brave with the flames. The dark night of the soul isn't the end of your story. It's the part where you take the pen. You're not just surviving, you're rising. And that, right there, is the meaning of life. Not what you've lost, but what you've found. Not who you were, but who you are: phoenix, soul, human, whole.